Hey there everyone, welcome back to Utility Sports. The video you've all been waiting for is finally here. My big board version 1.0 for the 2024 NBA draft is finally ready to record. I have been working tirelessly on it. In fact, this is my second time recording it, and it's an hour and a half long video because the first time my audio didn't work. What? I don't know why. So if you guys do appreciate the work that I've been putting in, I'm sick right now and I'm going to have to record for 3 hours today. Rest in peace, my voice. I hope you guys do enjoy the content. If you enjoy the work I put in, make sure to leave a like, subscribe to the channel for more, and let's get into that actual big board here. Remember, this is version 1.0. This is the real start of the real process for me here in narrowing things down. Reminder, this is just my first version, so don't get upset if a player is maybe a little too high or a little too low. This is still a work in progress. My final big board will probably come out a week before the NBA draft, which is June 26th. We are 40 days away from that date. This is my top 30 as of May 16th, 2024. The number 2 through 12 range, especially in this video, is wide open. There are a few tiers as well in this, like picks 30 through, or numbers 30 through 25 or so are kind of up in the air with some players who are not in this video, but will be found 31 through 40-ish, 31 through 45-ish on my board right now. The draft combine is obviously kind of solidating and solidifying a lot of my thoughts on some of these players, especially as we get closer to the end of the cycle, as I've spent more and more time evaluating film, watching full games of these kids. But the physicals matter. That's an important part of this. Obviously, we got all the measurements from the draft combine this past week or so. But also being a good basketball player does. That's going to be a main theme in this video. The 3 words dribble, pass, shoot are at the heart of my evaluation. If I feel a player can be positive in both on-ball and off-ball responsibilities, that will help the player significantly in my overall feel for them as a prospect. So keep that in mind as we go. Now, I want you guys to comment as we go through things you disagree with, things you think. I want to hear your thoughts in the comment section below. It is healthy to have disagreement, especially when we're talking about something like basketball. I want to hear your guys' thoughts, and I'm sure you don't think every single thing similarly to what I do. And I've been wrong in the past. I've had misses in drafts in the past. So I want to hear your guys' thoughts in the comment section below. I read every single comment. And again, if you do enjoy my overall work and the amount of time I put into this, please leave a like. Please subscribe if you are new, or maybe this is your 3rd, 4th, 5th time watching a Utility Sports video and you're not subscribed yet. Please do so. It would really help me out here a ton. We just passed 25,000 subscribers, which is crazy. Let's see if we can get toward that 30,000 mark by the end of this year's draft cycle. We got 40 days to get there. Now let's jump into my 30th ranked prospect. That is Yves Missi from Baylor, and the key word for him is rim. Rim is going to be the definition of Yves Missi's production on both ends of the basketball. Does he protect the rim? Can he block shots at the rim? And can he finish at the rim? And the answer to a lot of those are yes. He's very, very athletic. He's got the physical tools and traits at the combine. He measured in at nearly 6'11" without shoes on, with a 7'2" wingspan. He also has some good body mass to him at nearly 230 pounds. He's very defined with good muscular definition. He's a player who I do think overall has a lot of the physical tools and traits to work with that are super important when it comes to evaluating these prospects and breaking down who we think has some of that upside and potential to grow into great players. The reality though right now for Missi is he doesn't have the cerebral part of the game mastered yet, which is okay. This is a 20-year-old kid on draft night. He's extremely young. I'm not expecting him to have the game mastered perfectly. But what I do notice when I turn on the film, he's oftentimes out of position, especially early in plays, early in pick and roll coverage, early. He's not in position to be in the proper help side spot. However, his athleticism and his physical tools make up for that a lot of the time. The amount of whoa plays that this kid has, especially defensively as a shot blocker, is immense. But I do think that overall, when it comes down to him staying out of foul trouble and really maximizing who he can be as a defensive player, it comes down to his early shot clock positioning. If he's in the right spot at the right time, he's going to make the game a lot easier for himself, because in the NBA, his size and athleticism isn't completely unique. There's a lot of players who are huge, massive human beings who jump out of the gym. Those traits all define Yves Missi, but when you're facing the Luka Doncic's, Shai Gilgeous-Alexanders of the world, the Anthony Edwards of the world, those types of guys are going to get you in foul trouble if they catch you out of position for even a half second. With how dynamic, athletic, and smart they are as ball handlers, creators, Yves Missi has to be a player who he's going to take some real time to develop and grow on the defensive end of the floor, just from a positioning standpoint. And then offensively, you're really looking at him becoming a dynamic roll man. Not only is he going to be able to catch bounce passes, tight pocket passes with his hands, but also he's going to be a very good threat above the rim as a unique lob threat. When you look at him catching the ball anywhere near the restricted area, it just felt like every single time he touched it, it finished in a dunk. He has some semblance of a post game, but that is not how he's going to be utilized in the NBA. He's going to be predominantly a rim threat on both ends of the floor: rim protection, rim deterrence, and rim running, lob threat, rim finishing above the rim. Everything about Yves Missi comes down to his rim presence on both ends of the floor, and I think he's going to be able to blossom into that. He's got some work to do. I think he's going to need to land with a good developmental staff, someone who's going to put some time into him developing on the offensive end of the floor and the defensive end of the floor, of course. But I think he's got a lot of tools to work with, a lot of traits that I could see a team believing in, and I myself have him as the 30th ranked prospect currently on May 16th, 2024. Now we move on to my 29th ranked prospect, and that is Justin Edwards out of Kentucky. Another player with a lot of those physical tools. Standing at 6'6" without shoes on, he's got good wing size to him. He's got great length as well with a 6'10" wingspan. He's got a pro-ready body at about 210 pounds. I think he's got a frame that's going to be able to allow him to put on a little bit more muscle, maybe get up to 215, 220. That's when he's going to be able to really body with some of the other wings in the NBA. And really as a physical specimen, that's what had him as such a high recruit. And a big part of why he got to a blue blood like Kentucky playing for Coach Calipari is the physical traits he possessed coming into college basketball. Now, in his time in Kentucky, he kind of started out as a little bit of a question mark with how he was going to perform off the ball next to a bevy of talented players there in DJ Wagner, Rob Dillingham, Reed Sheppard, who you'll see later in this video as well. Justin Edwards, to me, stands out with his overall ability to adjust over time. That's something I think he did very well for the Wildcats, coming in kind of shaky to begin his college career, but really found himself and stabilized, especially by the end of the year where he had some really marquee performances. He had a night where he just did not miss a single shot from the field. I believe he shot 10 of 10. And I think we got to see some of that development and progression from him from a comfortability standpoint. The more comfortable he got in his role at Kentucky, the better he got at it. So when it comes to him adjusting to the NBA as an off-ball player, I think it starts with his spot-up game where he, again, took those strides throughout the season. But then outside of just his shooting, the offensive side of the ball really comes down to his ability to attack closeouts. And we see with his physical tools, and if he has a reliable jump shot at the NBA level, if teams close out on him, he's got the physical traits to blow by you with one or two dribbles, get all the way to the rim, finish above the rim. I think he's going to be a very good transition threat as well, someone who can be an above the rim finisher in advantage opportunities. I think still looking to see him take that growth and stride forward as a playmaker in advantage opportunities, but right now he projects to be a good play finisher, someone who is kind of hovering in that first round conversation for me. I really like a lot of his tools. I think his numbers were pretty impressive for me on synergy as well, even more so than I was expecting to see from him. So I do think Justin Edwards is a unique, interesting talent in this year's draft, someone with a lot of physicals that really impress, but also I think his skill set, as we got to see him really settled down at Kentucky, he really found himself. So I think that's what we need to bet on here. So once he gets settled into the NBA, comfortable and in a spot where he's ready to perform night in, night out after a couple of years of early development, whether that's in the G League or with the NBA team in limited minutes, I still think Justin Edwards is a guy who over time will grow in comfortability and really will start to find some success at the NBA level down the road. Number 28, I have Jacoby Walter from Baylor, and kind of opposite of Justin Edwards. Jacoby Walter found a lot of his success early in his collegiate career. In fact, his first ever game with the Baylor Bears, he went off for 28 points, which is a Baylor freshman record. And from there, you kind of thought, oh, maybe this guy has a runway to being a real lottery pick, maybe a top 10 pick in this year's draft. The rest of the season just didn't play out like that. Ended up only shooting 35% from three, which is really his greatest skill set. He is a three-point shooter. And when I think about Jacoby Walter as a prospect, I think comparing him to Jordan Hawkins from last year's draft is a very useful exercise. And you might say, well, that's interesting because Jordan Hawkins won a national championship super high volume 3-point shooter who found a ton of success at the collegiate level shooting threes. Jacoby Walter didn't find that success, so why are you comparing them as prospects? For me, Jordan Hawkins, one of my big concerns on him was the fact that he didn't have a ton of 2-point volume, and when he did have 2-point volume, it wasn't super efficient. And at times that makes you a streaky player, a streaky scorer, and more of a role player in the NBA. And that's exactly the same case for Jacoby Walter, someone who projects to be a 3-point shooting specialist, a role player, off-ball player who goes through streaks and stretches where he's not super productive. And I think we saw that in his freshman season at Baylor. That's just what his skill set and his play style is likely going to lead to at the NBA. But luckily, today's modern NBA is all about spacing, shooting, and having gravity around the perimeter. And I think that's what Jacoby Walter is going to provide. Like Jordan Hawkins, he's comfortable moving off of the basketball. He does a good job lifting or pushing either up from the corner or down into the corner or around the arc, especially above the break. He just is a natural mover off the ball. He gets his feet set. He knows how to move into spots to catch the basketball comfortable and ready to rise up into a jump shot. And I think his 3-point shot is going to be the marquee thing that gets him into the NBA. He's going to be viewed as a reliable 3-point shooter. He's going to be viewed as a sniper. And I think having that type of player, that archetype, teams value it. And I think that's what he's going to provide. And then from a physical standpoint, measured in at only about 6'4" at the combine, but he did measure in with a crazy 6'10" wingspan, a near plus 6-inch wingspan to height ratio. So that's a huge win for him. He's still under 20 years old on the night of the draft. There's a lot that teams are going to bank on with him from a development standpoint of attacking closeouts, maybe getting a little bit better finishing at the rim. If he can take meaningful strides in those areas while still being a quality 3-point shooter, you're looking at a player who's going to stick in the NBA for a very long time. Number 27, I have Johnny Furphy here, who is a very similar prospect in some regards to Jacoby Walter, but I think better in a lot of other ways. He's a little bit bigger, not quite the wingspan of Jacoby Walter, but just at 6'7.5", an impressive, lengthy, tall prospect who projects to be a 3-point shooting specialist. But I think one thing that really separates Furphy from Jacoby Walter is his ability to already attack closeouts. I think that's already established with his rim finishing numbers as a freshman at Kansas. I think he was impressive in his approach to the game, and not only just shooting the basketball, but when defenders would fly by him or close out off balance, he showcased the ability to use 1 or 2 dribbles to get all the way to the rim, finish above the rim. And honestly, a good comparison for him, I do think, is Grady Dick, who, funny enough, was also a white Kansas wing. Now, I don't think that they're the exact same prospect. I think Grady Dick was a little bit more of a creative below-the-rim finisher, probably a little bit better of a pull-up jump shooter as well, a little bit more natural of an off-ball mover. But I think Johnny Furphy, probably more of a true spot-up guy, someone who's just going to be a standstill catch-and-shoot player, which is good. That's not a bad thing at all, especially in today's pick-and-roll heavy offenses. Having someone who is a stationary catch-and-shoot guy is still a threat. And especially when you couple the fact that he's able to catch and not only just shoot, but catch and attack a closeout, get to spots on the floor where he's still a threat at the rim especially. He really fits in today's modern role player, which is offensively you're going to ask him to shoot threes and finish at the rim. And Johnny Furphy, if you look at all of his analytics, you look at his field goal percentage, you look at his 3-point percentage, everything, all of his percentile ranks on Synergy, he does a good job in those 2 specific categories more than most other prospects do. So Furphy, from that perspective, with his size, age, length component, he just projects to be a quality role player in the NBA, which maybe doesn't sound super exciting, but I think that's one of the strengths of this year's draft. There might not be the true top-end superstar. There might not be the Victor Wembanyama in this draft, maybe not even the Brandon Miller, Scoot Henderson. But what I do believe there is a bunch of guys who are going to contribute to winning, find important roles and niches in the NBA where they're going to be able to contribute. And in my opinion, it's a strong draft class because of that. There's not that generational build-around player, but there are a bunch of players who are going to impact winning. And when it comes to playoff time, players who have capabilities of impacting games and winning, I think Johnny Furphy fits into that. There's going to be a lot of players in this class that end up being important contributors down the road for several teams, which makes me very excited for this year's draft. Number 26, I have Nikola Djurisic from Mega Basket. He's an exciting player to evaluate, especially with his play style. He's actually a 4-year professional basketball player, and only at 20 years old as well. So he's been playing pro ball for quite some time over in Mega Basket, actually playing for the same team that developed Nikola Jovic and Nikola Jokic, the three-time MVP of the league. Something about Nikola's playing in Mega Basket, they just end up being pretty good, don't they? But at 6'7", he's got really great positional size, and I think one thing he's shown so far in the combine scrimmages this week is very functional athleticism. A few above the rim finishes, playing off the catch, attacking closeouts, doing things that honestly I think were big questions for him, who has been this year predominantly an on-ball player, an offensive creator, and initiator. Sometimes with that comes some lack of efficiency. So I think Djurisic has had a pretty good week for himself. He currently slates in as the number 26 prospect on my board, but I do have some concerns about him as well. His play style, especially his decision making as a facilitator. He kind of has a flair or eccentricism to him that reminds me a little bit of Leandro Bolmaro, who came into the, I believe, 2020 draft. I believe he was picked 25th overall in that year's class, and obviously didn't have a long NBA career. And a big reason why was he just couldn't really harness his playmaking potential. He had a lot of feel. He had very good passing vision, things that Nikola Djurisic also has. But he had a little bit too much pizzazz in his game, where he would, instead of just taking the simple play, making a strong finish at the rim, he would try and whip in a behind the back pass or try and fit in a pass in a window that wasn't there. Djurisic has a little bit of that in his game as well. So I think with his playmaking feel and vision at his size, there's a lot to work with there. But he needs to get a strong coach and a strong development staff around him in order for them to really harness and maximize that playmaking and turn it into something that's super functional at the NBA level. And that's one of the key words here, functional. You need him to be not only just a quality player off the catch, but the hope is for him that he turns into maybe even a secondary creator for your offense, maybe even a primary creator. If everything goes perfectly, I think that would be a little too much to expect or to ask for Djurisic. But I do think there's a lot to work with here from a feel perspective. And I think that his scoring, if you can really harness that playmaking, the playmaking gravity is real, where he's going to open up opportunities for himself as a scorer. At number 25, I have Tyler Smith from the G League Ignite program. And I was actually pleasantly surprised with how he measured in at the combine, measuring in at 6'9" without shoes and a 7'1" wingspan, over 220 pounds. I think he's at a spot where his body is going to be one of his main assets this draft process. With really good physical tools, he projects to be a four-man with some real shooting touch. Now, for me, it kind of reminds me of Isaiah Todd coming into what I believe was the 2021 draft cycle. Isaiah Todd was a player with a ton of athleticism, pretty good length and size to him, but lived predominantly on a mid-range jump shot diet, and I think that's something that Tyler Smith's got to kind of escape. Now, he does project to be somewhat of a face-up four-man, with shot-making potential, especially in that mid-range area. But for me, the least valuable archetype in all of basketball is a power forward who doesn't shoot a ton of threes. And the reason for that is, with how the analytics have shaped the game today, the teams that shoot the most threes are oftentimes some of the best teams in the league, and they have the best odds at winning unless there's a real talent deficit. Think about the Denver Nuggets, a team that doesn't shoot a ton of threes. What they do have is a ton of playmaking, toughness, and a bunch of players who just fit together. For Tyler Smith to work in the NBA, I think around that, he's either going to have to land in the right system, or he's going to have to adjust his shot diet quite a bit. And he has the tools to turn into a very good NBA player because he's super athletic, can jump out of the gym. We've seen him be extremely active on the offensive glass at times for the Ignite program. I think it's about harnessing all of that and really utilizing his physical and athletic dominance to get to the rim a ton, finish at the rim a ton, put on rim pressure, get to the free throw line, but then also just continuing to work on getting three-point shots up, really building out his reps to the point where all of his mid-range jump shot diet is exclusively three-point shots. And with that, he's going to find a real role in this league. I'm still a little critical of Tyler Smith, again, because I don't have a lot of faith or belief in players who project to be solely power forwards, especially living on a mid-range shot diet. I just have concerns about that. Now, there are examples of players kind of molding out of that. Rui Hachimura is the most recent example to maybe blossom into more of a three-point shooter than just a pull-up jump shooter. That's what you're hoping for here out of Tyler Smith, that you get more of that from his game. So it'll be an interesting developmental path to watch for Tyler Smith, but I do have my questions and concerns there. But I think from a physical perspective, with his length, size, weight component, the athleticism to jump out of the gym, at just 19 and a half years old. There is a lot to work with. He just needs the right development staff there around him to really mature his game, age it into being a quality NBA player. Because I see a little bit of Terrence Jones in him as well, and that's a positive thing. Terrence Jones didn't stick in the league for a long time, but I think that kind of skill set can fit, can work if you really harness the skills correctly. And I think Tyler Smith has a lot of those traits. It's just about really turning them into a modern day NBA player. Number 24, I have Tidjane Salaun from Cholet, and a lot of the concerns I have about Tyler Smith really translates to Tidjane Salaun as well. Salaun playing for Cholet, part of the LNB Pro A League, the same league that Victor Wembanyama was just a part of last year. And Cholet is a historic team and a historic organization in the LNB Pro A, so he's playing meaningful minutes for a very good French team. And these are all predictive measurements here. These are from reports. We did not have Salaun at the actual combine. So some of these numbers will get updated in the next couple of weeks or so once we have more information. But right now the expectation is without shoes, he's around 6'9", with roughly a 7'1" wingspan and weighing in around 205 pounds. Now he's also, just like Tyler Smith, extremely young. And I think one of the big questions for Salaun is that three-point shot. If you watch him play, he's got one of the highest arcing three-point shots I can remember for a draft prospect. He shoots a moon ball a little bit. So do you bet on that or do you not? Now, he's been productive in limited minutes for Cholet. So the efficiency's there, the effectiveness on the floor has been there for him. But I think adjusting to the NBA game, where again, three-pointers just are such a massive part of the game, that's one of the big concerns. But he has the physical tools, the physical profile, and the ability to probably guard out on the perimeter, be a player who's going to be pretty switchable at the NBA level. And I think that's one of the big positives in Salaun's game is defensively, he's a prospect who could help you on the glass. He could help you defend out on the perimeter, give you a lot more length and size, just like how a bunch of teams in the league, especially in the last couple of years, just continue to value length. Even though small ball felt like it was going to take over in the late 2010s, it's actually the opposite. Tall ball is here to stay. Tidjane Salaun could be an important contributor to a team like that. But again, you really have to bet on his three-point shot. You have to bet on his effectiveness as a playmaker off of a live bounce, because that's a big part of being a stretch four as well. It's not just, okay, can you catch and shoot? It's, can you catch and make a read off of a live dribble? And I think that's something I still need to see a little bit more from Salaun. One thing I do have to say, my range here from about 25 through 17 is pretty condensed. It's pretty tight. So in my next version, if I get to 2.0 and Salaun's up to number 17, it might look like he's moved up a ton. That's not quite necessarily the case. I think right now these players are kind of bunched together a bit for me, and I think as I get down toward the back end of the process, I'll have a little bit better of a feeling for where I truly want all of these guys individually ranked. Salaun right now, for me, could maybe slide up to 16, 17. And that's where I'm projecting him to go in a lot of these mocks, looking at him as a potential lottery pick even. Remember, this is not a mock draft. This is a big board. So it's very, very different. But for me, Salaun, I think, is a player who has a lot of upside. There's a lot of tools to work with, but we've seen tools in the past not really come to fruition. I still think we just need to see some more of that functionality and how it's going to play out at the NBA level. Number 23, I have Tyler Kolek out of Marquette, a player I have not talked about very much on the channel, but I am very excited to do so in this video. He's an impressive facilitator, and that's really at the heart of his game. He really knows how to get to spots on the floor where the defense has to react to his presence, and as a result of that, he's able to fit tight passes into tight windows. And he kind of reminds me of TJ McConnell in some ways. Similar size profile. Obviously, the fact that they're both white doesn't hurt either. But Kolek's different in some ways as well. So TJ McConnell lives off of a lot of mid-range shots and obviously some real creative angles. Kolek, I think, a little bit different. Not quite the off-the-dribble scorer. In fact, he was actually pretty poor as an off-dribble shooter this past year for Marquette. But one thing he does very well, unlike TJ McConnell, is catch and shoot from deep. Was an actually very efficient three-point shooter off of the catch this past year for Marquette. So if you're looking for ways for him to fit into the NBA, I think he can survive in lineups next to other ball handlers as a catch and shoot option, and someone who can also be a secondary playmaker. That's another big part of the NBA right now. It's not just about spacing and three-point shooting, it's about spacing, three-point shooting, and playmaking. Guys who are capable of doing things off of a live dribble, multifaceted, talented players who not only are just shooters or just defenders or just play finishers, the more you have of everything, the better. And I think that's a pretty elementary concept, obviously. But Tyler Kolek fits into that with his ability to catch and shoot. But then offensively, when he does have the ball in his hands, he's a high pick and roll usage player, very adept at getting to spots on the floor, reading defenses with his creativity and craftiness as a passer. I think he can really utilize roll men and lob threats to his team's advantage. I think that's going to be one of the big positives from his game. He's an older prospect, but I could see him fitting in a number of different circumstances and scenarios. One concern I do have about Kolek, though, he's not quite the scoring gravity player that you're going to see in some of these future players a little bit higher on my board. Kolek off the dribble really struggled this past year to score. Obviously leverages his positioning very well to create opportunities for his teammates, especially Oso Ighodaro there at Marquette. But I think when it comes down to how teams are going to try and guard him, especially in like playoff settings in the future, they're going to be willing to live with him trying to create his own shot. So for me, that's going to be obviously a red flag and a concern. That's why he's not way higher on my list. That's why he's not a lock to be a first-round pick in this year's draft. But I do think with his overall feel for the game, his feel as a playmaker, creator of offense, and his ability to shoot off the catch, he is a dynamic offensive player enough to be a respectable NBA player and someone who, just with his feel for the game, is going to make some inroads going into his rookie season and beyond. At number 22, I have Isaiah Collier from USC, and this is going to be one of the more hot button topics in this video. I know some people are going to have some real disagreements with me here, and again, that is perfectly healthy, that is perfectly normal. I expect you guys to have your own thoughts and opinions on some of these prospects, and Collier specifically seems like one with a lot of divide. For me, if it came down to just evaluating his burst and his playmaking feel, he could be a top 5 or 10 prospect in the class. With his play style, I think there are some concerns. He's going to be a predominantly below the rim finisher at the NBA level, and we've seen players in the past really struggle, especially early in their careers, adjusting to the NBA's length, size, and athleticism when it comes to their rim protection. One of the big swing skills for Isaiah Collier this draft cycle is his jump shooting, and especially his pull-up jump shooting. If he emerges as a very good pull-up jump shooter, he turns into an absolutely great pick. But for me right now, there are massive red flags with the way that he defends, the way that he creates his own offense, and I think with teams specifically, how does he fit off the ball? I talked about Tyler Kolek and his ability to catch and shoot and fit around other talented playmakers and guys who are going to have the ball in their hands a ton. If you're drafting Isaiah Collier to be your point guard, well, you have to believe he's going to be a 15 point per game, 10 assists per game guy, or something better than that even, to make it worth being a point guard in today's NBA. To me, he screams a little bit of Eric Bledsoe, minus the defensive capabilities. Just with Collier's game, I do have some concerns about the way that he's going to fit into the NBA, especially playing around other players who need the ball or have the ball in their hands. Fit is one of the most important things. Collier, I think with the way that he plays, slows the game down too much. If you're coaching him, you would want him to be playing in a high-paced setting where he's getting to the rim at ease, getting 2 feet in the paint, and then using his facilitating feel to kick the ball out to shooters. USC, first of all, didn't have a ton of shooters around him, so that's already a team-building issue that he had to overcome. But then secondly, he slowed the game down himself, oftentimes catching and waiting for 2, 3, 4 seconds at a time. Just didn't really feel like he had a great understanding of his best way of playing. And I think that's going to be something that teams have to figure out how to overcome with him on the floor. It's going to be something they have to teach out of his system. He's got a great body type to him in terms of his overall frame, strength, muscular definition. I do think Collier has a lot of positive traits, which is why he's still in the top 30 here. But for me, there's also a ton of red flags where I just don't know if I can trust the pull-up jump shooting. I really don't know if I can trust the overall play style when it comes to playing next to other players who have the basketball. And if you don't think Isaiah Collier can be a number 1 option or a number 2 option on a very good team, then how does he fit in? It feels like the Eric Bledsoe equation a little bit for me when Bledsoe was in Milwaukee alongside Chris Middleton and Giannis Antetokounmpo. But then the big flaw for me here with Collier is he's not as good of a defensive player as Eric Bledsoe ever was, and he's not even close. If you look at all of the data we have from Synergy, Collier's defensive profile is very, very poor. So that's already a massive red flag for me. But there's also a lot of lazy moments where he misses rotations, where he doesn't close out properly, he closes out off balance. I just think Isaiah Collier is a huge project, to be completely honest with you, and I'm not exactly certain if I would ever buy into giving him the basketball as frequently as he'll need it to be worth his draft range, where he's a possible and potential lottery pick in this year's draft. Number 21, I have Adem Bona from UCLA, the sophomore big man. Is an impressive prospect for me for a few different reasons. Now, he's a little bit smaller without shoes on, 6'8.25". He's not a huge, ginormous center, but he makes up for that with his weight, wingspan, and athleticism. Like I talked about with Yves Missi having a lot of those physical traits, I think Adem Bona shares a lot of those physical traits, but he's a much more mature, NBA-ready prospect when it comes to his actual positioning, especially on the defensive end of the floor, as somebody who makes some wow plays as a shot blocker, rim protector, but also just is traditionally in the right spots a lot of the time. You can use him as a hedger on screens, which is very unique. Not a lot of big men in the league today are capable of doing that. Obviously, you have some of those big-time drop defenders like a Brook Lopez. You also have some others who, like Karl Anthony Towns for a while in Minnesota, was just a big-time high-wall defender where you're just only using him to hedge because he wasn't good in any of these other areas. Adem Bona does a little bit of everything. You can hedge with him. You can play drop with him. I think you can sometimes even live at switching with him. Now, I wouldn't do that a ton because you're just asking a big man to guard guards, which is dangerous. But I think you can survive in those settings at times, which gives you the ability to really manipulate your pick and roll defensive scheme coverages. And that's one of the most important things in the league. Versatility this time of year is the key buzzword. And I think Adem Bona defensively gives you a ton of that while still providing that traditional rim protection as a big man. He's strong enough to body in the post with some of the better post scorers at 243 pounds. Then offensively, he's a rim finisher like we talked about with Yves Missi earlier. He's also someone who I think has an underrated post game to him. He operates quickly in the post, so if you get mismatches where a small gets switched onto him, whether that's through a tag or just through switching coverages, I think Adem Bona can take advantage of those matchups as well. He's not going to be a high-volume scorer in the NBA. He's not going to be someone you feed the ball to a ton, but I do think he has the skill set and the touch with both his right and left hand to be successful in those settings. Adem Bona, I think, is one of the more underrated prospects in this entire draft cycle so far. For me, I have a firm first-round grade on him currently. I know a lot of people are looking at Bona as a potential second-round pick. It would not shock me at all if a team does come into the first round and select Bona on draft night. Now, he has not been in any of my first-round mocks this year, so I'm not guaranteeing he's a first-round pick. Of course not. But I am saying that there is a real chance of that, and I would not be shocked if some team does really like his overall versatility and what he could provide to their defense while being an awesome offensive rim force and rim presence as a lob threat as well. Number 20, here's one of the big names in this big board, and one that I'm sure a lot of people were curious where I was going to have. Zach Edey from Purdue is my currently ranked 20th player in this year's draft. I know some people were probably expecting me to not have him at all in my top 30 because everyone thinks I'm a hater for some reason. I don't have him as a lottery player in this year's draft. I just think there's a little bit too much talent for him to really be in there with some of the lack of versatility you're going to get with him, especially on the defensive end of the floor. But there is the reality here that he is just a ginormous, massive human being who is going to be very, 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 very good in one specific defensive role, and that is drop coverage, deep drop coverage, rim protector, deter shots at the rim. And that, again, is, like I talked about with Yves Missi earlier at number 30, one of the most important parts of team defense is deterring shots at the rim. And that's where Zach Edey, at nearly 7'4" without shoes on, he's just a ginormous human being with an incredible 7'10" wingspan, 299 pounds, strong physical frame, very well conditioned. I think tested extremely well at the NBA Draft Combine. That was impressive for me. It moved him up a couple of spots on my big board. Was not expecting him to test quite as well as he did. And just at 22 years old, he just turned 22 years old this week. So I know some people are going to say, oh, he's ancient. He's actually not that old. 22 years old is right in the heart of this year's class. There's a lot of 20-year-olds. There's some 23-year-olds. Zach Edey is not an ancient prospect. In fact, he's kind of your typical draft age for someone who's just a little bit outside of the lottery. So I think for Edey here specifically, you're drafting him to be a deep drop coverage pick and roll defender. And then offensively, people are going to say, oh, you don't want to feed him the ball a ton in the post. You're 100% right. That is not the way teams will use him or should use him. Now, at times they will feed him in those situations, but the real value, the real benefit of drafting Zach Edey for the offensive side of the floor is using him frequently as a pick and roll man screener. He not only is a huge, massive frame, which is going to set awesome screens for guards, but he has fantastic hands. He's able to roll down into space. He's got a ton of rim gravity, which is super important. Again, gravity is one of those key words in this video. If you can attract tag men to feel like they have to defend you, and you can shrink the defense a little bit, open catch and shoot threes for your teammates, that's something Zach Edey is going to do. I had someone ask me on Twitter if I think Zach Edey would be a good fit with Zion Williamson. 110% I do. If Zion Williamson is attacking and Zach Edey setting him a screen to his left hand, teams are going to freak out about Zion Williamson attacking downhill. As a result, you're already going to have to try and shrink the floor. Your center is going to have to rotate over to him because he's this combination of size, power, athleticism that you're worried about getting to his left hand and finishing at the rim. Oh, and by the way, we have this 7'4" guy also rolling to the rim who has tremendous touch. Edey would be a perfect fit in New Orleans. He has a ton of gravity, a ton of rim pressure, and I think would be a significant upgrade for them long-term over Jonas Valanciunas, who's already kind of at the, I think, apex or behind the apex of his career. For me, I think Zach Edey could be a bigger, slower Ivica Zubac. Very similar play style. Both of them have very good hands. They've both capable of having monster performances. Zubac at times has had 20 games in his career. I think Zach Edey will be capable of doing something similar. He's not going to be a superstar. He's not a build-around player, but he's going to have monster performances at times. He will get targeted at times as well. We see in the playoffs, guys like Brook Lopez get played off the floor a bit because in deep drop coverage, you're liable to giving up a ton of pull-up threes, a ton of pull-up twos, and if teams get hot and they feel comfortable, that's really the biggest thing. They feel comfortable coming off of those actions because they know that you're going to be in drop coverage. They just feel wide open. So that's going to be one of the big deterrents on Zach Edey and why I don't have him as a lottery pick. There's not a lot of defensive scheme versatility unless he goes to a team with another talented big man, like the San Antonio Spurs, for example, with Wembanyama. I think Edey and Wembanyama together would be really unique, and I think you could employ Edey in multiple different defensive ways then because you have another big man behind him. But I do think overall Edey is a dynamic, rolling big man who's going to have a real chance at making an impact in the NBA. Number 19, I have DaRon Holmes II, and dynamic pick and roll big man is the perfect way to describe Holmes and his overall game. Measured in a little bit under 6'9" without shoes on, but with shoes he will be a competent NBA size center, standing around 6'10" or so, with a 7'1" wingspan, good athletic traits, and some real rim protection capabilities. Averaged over 2 blocks per game this past year for Dayton. And I think one of the biggest things about DaRon Holmes' game, not only his skill set working in the pick and roll, but the sheer volume that he spent time screening in the college game is going to be very helpful for him quickly adjusting to the NBA. For those of you who do not know, Dayton runs a continuity ball screen offense under head coach Anthony Grant. And because of that, DaRon Holmes II, for a majority of his collegiate career, what does he do in practice? What does he do in games? He sets screens. And because of that, not only does he have a ton of reps as a screen setter, but he's a ton of reps scoring out of screening opportunities, which is how you're going to want to use him in the NBA. He can screen and pop. He's really grown and blossomed into a quality three-point shooting big man. Now, I'm not saying he's going to come into the league and shoot 40% from three early, probably closer to 30% from three early in his career, but he will be a respectable threat that you'll get open looks with him from pick and pop actions, and that's super important. But he's also got good hands as a roll man. He can finish above and below the rim. He has good touch, a very reliable right hand baby hook, similar to Zach Edey. Obviously not quite as dominant with it as Edey was from a touch perspective, but still very reliable. And then I think Holmes, with his overall versatility defensively and offensively, you can run multiple different schemes with him on offense, and I think defensively as well. You're going to be able to use him up at the level of the screen. You're going to be able to use him in drop. Just a little bit more versatility than Edey provides, even though Edey's, I think, the better offensive player. I think Holmes gives you more versatility and gives you a little bit of an easier fit in your overall roster construction because you're going to be able to ask him to do different things, which is why he finds himself one spot ahead of Edey on my board at this point in time. Number 18, I have Kyle Filipowski here from Duke, and this is another player where versatility becomes one of the most important things. If you look at his scoring profile, he was capable of scoring in isolation, in post-ups, in pick and roll opportunities, pick and pop opportunities. He scored as a cutter, as a dive man. He scored on putbacks. He did a lot of different things for Duke over the last 2 years, and I think One thing that Shire asked him to do there with the Blue Devils was create a lot of offense. He worked with Derek Lively a year ago when they were both true freshmen. I think one thing that Filipowski didn't do very well then was utilize another big man as a lob threat, but I do think he got some experience doing that, which would make him a unique tweener in the NBA. Now, he does have a negative wingspan, which is obviously a concern for a lot of people that are going to freak out about that. For me, he's been playing with the negative wingspan his whole college career. I'm not super concerned about it, but he is closer to 21 years old than he is to 20. He is somewhat of a polished product with his ability to step out behind the three-point line a bit. Now, he hasn't had the consistency or reliability as a three-point shooter you'd like to see, but I do like Filipowski's game when it comes to his tweenerisms, and that's one of the most fascinating things about Kyle Filipowski. People are going to highlight that he's not big enough to be a center and he's too slow to be a power forward. That's going to be one of the most heard conversations about Filipowski over the next month and a half. I think the flip side to that is, well, he's bigger than a power forward and he's quicker than a center. You could really paint that picture either way you want. If you want to look at it with a glass half empty standpoint, you say he's a tweener for the worst parts. If you want to look at it with a glass half full perspective, you say he's a tweener in all the positive ways, where he can shoot better than most centers, and he can handle better than most centers, and he's also more agile than most centers, and he's bigger than most power forwards. I really think for him it's going to be vital to land in a situation where there's the right pieces around him, a playmaking guard that can make his life easier as a cutter, as a pick and roll man, or a pick and roll popper. That will be super important for him. And I also think playing next to an anchor center will be good for him as well. It'll take some of that responsibility off of his shoulders early in his career, but there are still going to be opportunities for him to be a unique stretch five where you're playing kind of a smaller team, maybe you're playing in a smaller setting, and Filipowski's able to move to the center spot for you for stretches of time. For him, it's all about versatility. I think if you land in the right situation, Filipowski could turn into an awesome NBA player who has a very long NBA career, kind of like Kelly Olynyk, or you could find a situation where he just doesn't find his footing, kind of turns into a Myers Leonard type player. That's where the concern is if you don't get things to click for him and if that three-point shot doesn't become as reliable as you would like it to. But I still think the playmaking's there for him to rely on a little bit. He's done a lot of stuff with the ball in his hand, so I think scaling him down and roll a little bit will make his life easier at the NBA level. Number 17, Bub Carrington from Pittsburgh, and this is a player who I think has massive potential. He's got a very good wingspan for his position at 6'8", and I think he's someone who could turn into a real shot-creating point guard at the NBA level. He does a lot of things. He fills the stat sheet up in a number of ways, both as a rebounder and as a facilitator, but I do think he has a lot of room to grow as a three-point shooter. Now, he shot it very well at the NBA Draft Combine. I had people commenting this at me, saying, how did you not include him in the shooters category of your NBA Draft Combine Day 1 winners video? And the reason I didn't have him in there, if you watch that actual portion of his shooting drills, he had one of the slowest releases at the Combine. That is going to be a problem as a guard with the speed of the NBA, the way that players are able to close out effectively onto shooters. Carrington's got a lot of work to do speeding up his catch and shoot release and also just increasing his reliability as a pull-up three-point shooter. Now, he's a very good pull-up mid-range shooter. I think he's very natural with the ball in his hands. He's somebody who I am betting on becoming a point guard, but I think there's work to be done for him to turn his overall efficiency from a not super useful offensive player to a very good one. I think there is the actual skills, the functional athleticism, skills, and size to turn him into that player. He's just got a lot of work to do. So Carlton Carrington, for me, a player I like, but I think very unpolished at this point. If you draft him and you polish him up and you get all of the best out of him, I could see him turning into a DeJounte Murray type of offensive player. He'll never be that good defensively as DeJounte Murray was at times with San Antonio, but I do think offensively, very similar skill set, could become a dynamic pick and roll shooter, someone who can work downhill, get to the rim a bit, finish above the rim a little bit, but mostly below the rim, while still being a very dangerous pull-up shooter against pick and roll drop coverages. Number 16, I have Devin Carter out of Providence. I do like this kid. Measured in a little bit shorter than I was hoping for him, at a little bit over 6'2" and a quarter, but his wingspan more than makes up for it. A 6.5-inch difference there. Obviously a huge positive for him. He is a little bit of an older prospect, but I do think that wingspan specifically stands out to me on film as Carter made a ton of plays at the rim defensively. Really, if you look at his synergy numbers, he checks out as a very good defensive prospect with the ability to stay on guys' hips, challenge shots at the rim, make plays defensively both in the passing lane and as a shot blocker, with the kind of desire to be a point of attack defender. And if you're drafting Devin Carter, first of all, there's a lot that comes offensively. He's a player who lives a lot in self-creation, can make and create shots for himself. And I think once he adjusts to the NBA, it'll be easier for him to score at a more effective clip because of how much he had to create for that Providence offense. Whereas as soon as you get him into a system where he's playing off of other guards, other playmakers, I think opportunities will just come a little bit easier to him while still having the upside to attack off the catch, make plays off of a live dribble as both a facilitator and a scorer. And then defensively, again, he wants to be a point of attack defender. He wants to be a point of attack stopper. And half of the battle in the NBA is guys who want to. And want to is something you're going to hear from a ton of NBA coaches. When you ask them what makes someone so good, they oftentimes highlight multiple efforts, hustle, the ability and willingness to go out and compete. And I think Carter has that to him. Now, it stands out to me on film. I do think, though, that those generic terms aren't the most useful when it comes to actually evaluating why Carter's good. For me, at the end of the day, it's because he's able to stay on guys' hips. He has good anticipatory skills as a defender and the wingspan to, again, make plays as well. So Carter, not only does he have that willingness, that want to, that coaches will highlight, but for me specifically, he has the actual tangible, functional footwork, technique, skill set, and the wingspan, the size component to it as well with his wingspan that makes him capable of succeeding in those situations and settings as well. Number 15, I have Baylor Scheierman out of Creighton. And now this is where that dribble, pass, shoot that I talked about earlier in the open is one of the most important 3-word phrases you can hear from me all draft cycle long. This is going to be a hot topic. This is going to be one where people say, wait a minute, who? Because most people will not have Baylor Scheierman as an even first-round level prospect. For me, I have him near lottery consideration in this year's draft. If you want me to give a comparison for who I think Scheierman's going to turn into in the NBA, I think he is a slightly more athletic Joe Ingles, and that is very high praise. Joe Ingles has had a very long, successful NBA career, both as a starter and as a bench weapon throughout his time in the league. Think back to his time with Utah Jazz, especially on a team that made multiple runs to the second round of the playoffs, multiple playoff appearances, won 60 games in a single season as well. Joe Ingles was always a key piece in there as a secondary playmaker, another play initiator, and an off-ball shooter. Take that to Baylor Scheierman. Guess where he ranked out of all prospects in this year's draft as a pick-and-roll ball handler? Yeah, that's right. He ranked in the 100th percentile. He was the most efficient pick-and-roll ball handler, and he's not a point guard. He is a wing. That is what makes him so unique. He shoots very, very well. He has some real deep range to him. He constantly shoots beyond 25 feet at the college game even, which is way beyond the college three-point line. Baylor Scheierman is going to adjust very quickly and very easily to the NBA with more pacing and space around him. He's capable of throwing lob passes. He did so a lot with Ryan Kalkbrenner with the Creighton Blue Jays this past year. I think Scheierman is a no-brainer, obvious 10 to 15 year NBA career type of player. That's what I'm betting on in this year's draft. Guys who I know are good basketball players, players who I know have the functional skills to impact winning at the NBA. And yes, Scheierman doesn't have the most dynamic physical traits. His wingspan isn't 7'3". He doesn't jump out of the gym. But what he does do very well is play basketball, both as an on-ball player, as a creator, but also as a spot-up threat, someone who can attack off the dribble, as a creator again for others or himself in situations. He has a pretty dynamic handle for his size and wingspan and position. He is a bit of an older prospect, nearly 24 years old on draft night, but I do think Scheierman is a player who is a no-brainer, long-term NBA career. For me, I have him 15th overall right now in this year's class, and I don't really feel like that's going to change too much. If it doesn't move up, he's not going to move down very much. So for me, I think Scheierman firmly a first-round grade for me this year, and a player who I do think is going to be a very good NBA player for a long time. Number 14, I have Dalton Knecht, another older prospect, but there is a little bit of a gap here between Baylor Scheierman and Dalton Knecht for me, because I think Knecht is somebody that I for sure 100% know coaches will all see the value in playing because of his off-ball capabilities. I highlighted Jordan Hawkins earlier as I compared him to Jacoby Walter. Dalton Knecht has more of that similar skill set and that similar success that Jordan Hawkins had at UConn as a dynamic off-screen user at the college game. Dalton Knecht came off of a ton of screens this past year for Tennessee. Now, they didn't all turn into buckets, especially mid-range jump shots. Surprisingly, Knecht, a little bit of a worse mid-range shooter than you'd expect, but he was a super efficient laser from behind the three-point line. And I think if you're drafting Dalton Knecht, you're looking at him as a floor spacer, someone who's going to fit around other talent. That's a big component of this year's draft. You're looking for players who fit. What teams need shooting? Obviously, there's a ton of them. Every team in the league could use more shooting. That's one of the most obvious statements. Every time of year, everyone's like, shooting, shooting, shooting. Yeah, Dalton Knecht gives you that. So for me, with his size, I think he measured a little bit better than people were expecting at 6'5.25". Wingspan measured out a little bit better as well. I think he's very strong. I think he's got an NBA-ready frame, NBA-ready body, of course, at 23 years old. And then also when it comes to the actual impact offensively he can have, this, everyone's going to talk about his shooting and off-ball gravity and can he space the floor. I think there's a real positive to the fact that he had such an on-ball responsibility in his time at Tennessee for the Volunteers. They relied on him to be not only a shot maker, but a shot creator as well. So for Tennessee specifically, he was a heavy lifter for their offense. Now in the NBA, his role is going to scale down. He's going to play more in a Doug McDermott type of role where he's predominantly working off the basketball. But we've seen he has the ability off of 1, 2, maybe 3 dribbles to get to open space, create open looks for himself. And I think passing-wise, he showed just enough to trust as a guy who, if you hit him on a cut, he can make the next pass to the corner. Now, he's not going to be a 7-8 assists per game guy. I think Baylor Scheierman has a lot more of that playmaking savant to him than Knecht does, but I think Knecht has enough connectivity, not to make a pun, but he has enough of that connectivity to fit into an offense as not only a shot maker, shot shooter, he has someone who can also make that next play when it's obvious and evident that he needs to. Number 13 here, I have Kel'el Ware from Indiana. His college journey was a little bit different than some of these other players we've recently talked about. Now, some of them have had transfers in there, obviously with the NIL situation as well. It has upped the frequency of transfers in recent years, but Kel'el Ware in Indiana first started his career at Oregon and really didn't get the minutes I thought he deserved for the Ducks a few years ago. And as a result of that, he transferred out, went to Indiana for the Hoosiers to play under Mike Woodson, who, what did he do last year? Well, he got Trayce Jackson-Davis to the NBA as a promising young big man who's going to have a very good NBA career ahead of him. And I think Kel'el Ware benefited in a lot of the same ways TJD did with the Hoosiers, as well as a high usage, high volume post-up player, a high volume, high usage roller as a screen man. I think Kel'el Ware, with his physical tools, look at him, near 7-footer without shoes on, a near 7.5-foot wingspan. He was very, very impressive as a physical specimen early in his college career for Oregon in low minutes. And then I think he found that consistency, that stability, and that productivity that he needed to at Indiana this past year as a guy who has probably cemented himself as a surefire first-round pick, going anywhere from maybe pick 12 to pick 25, pick 26, maybe Washington at that spot would be his floor. I like Kel'el Ware's game a lot. I think he can have a similar impact early in his NBA career to what we saw Derek Lively do for the Dallas Mavericks this past year if Ware is given the opportunity to play heavy minutes and have a pretty big role on a team. So at his size, his physicals, he checks out from a height, weight, wingspan perspective, but then when you compare his athleticism to other bigs in this class as well, that's where he really stands out. He has some whoa plays when it comes to protecting the rim, blocking shots. Sometimes he sends guards shots into the first or second row there in Indiana. Just a lot of impressive stuff on film from him on the defensive end of the floor. Now, I don't know if that reliability, that consistency was there all the time, but when he does make the effort to go and protect the rim, he does so at a very, very good clip. Averaged over 2 blocks per game in just about 26 minutes a night. So he was super productive this past year for Indiana. I think that's one of the most important things when we talk about Kel'el Ware. The productivity is there as a big man. I think some of the questions are his stamina, his endurance. Can he stay on the floor for 30 minutes a night at the NBA level? That's a big question still too. But he has a lot of the physical tools you're looking for. And then offensively, I think has emerging touch. He also stepped out behind the three-point line a decent amount this past year, a respectable amount. So if you're looking for a big man who can maybe stretch the floor for you a little bit, we talked about DaRon Holmes the second earlier. Zach Edey's flashed a little bit of that at the combine. I think Kel'el has the most tangible route to being that, though, among that grouping of players, because he has showcased that at the college game very reliably on pretty decent volume. And then as a lob threat, I think one of the more prolific rim finishers in this year's draft class as well. Obviously, that's a big component of being a good center. We talked about it with Yves, Missi, Adem, Bona, Zach Edey, DaRon Holmes. You have to be able to finish at the rim. Rim scoring gravity is super important. Kel'el has that. It opens up a lot of options for playmakers, whether it's an above the rim lob, whether it's a little pocket pass into a roll. Kel'el is going to have the hands and the touch and the above the rim finishing to really capitalize as an offensive player. His role is going to look drastically different than it did at Indiana. He's not going to be a high post-up player. He's not going to be a super high usage player, but I think his traits and his overall game will help him succeed in more of a traditional rim protector, rim deterrent, rim running, lob threat, big man at the NBA level, kind of similar to what we see from Isaiah Jackson at times for the Indiana Pacers. I think Kel'el is going to fit into a similar role like that, but maybe even a little bit better. At number 12, remember, we have this congested top 12. So some of these are going to really surprise some people in here. My number 11 specifically is going to be a little bit of a shocker, I'm sure, for a lot of the viewers. Just remember, this top 12 is very congested for me. The real difference between maybe my number 11 prospect and my number 7 prospect right now is maybe 3 hairs. There's not a lot of space between these guys, and there's a lot of things that can change. My number 1 spot is pretty much cemented, but 2 through 12, there's a lot of dynamism and a lot of changes that I might make in the last 40 days of this year's draft cycle. But let's get into my number 12 prospect here. I have Jared McCain out of Duke. This kid is a flamethrower from behind the three-point line. Shot the ball very, very well all year long for the Blue Devils. Super reliable shooter. And I think off of that, there are other things that he can do very well that makes his shooting very potent. First of all, he gets to the rim and finishes decently at the rim. For a shooter, having that ability to attack closeouts, get to the paint, get 2 feet inside the arc, and still be a scoring threat, that's what separates a guy like Jared McCain from a Jacoby Walter in this year's draft for me. And then when you also factor in McCain's creativity as a ball handler, actually ranked very, very well as on an efficiency standpoint as a pick and roll ball handler this year for the Blue Devils as well. Now, obviously, that wasn't his primary role. Filipowski and Tyrese Proctor did a ton of the ball handling, on-ball responsibilities there at Duke, but I think McCain, when he did have those opportunities, really shined and showcased his ability to make plays off of a live dribble. And again, that comes down to his ability to attack closeouts. With his shooting, which will get him on the floor, players are going to run him off the line. And with that, I think McCain has the creativity, the passing instincts, the feel to really hurt teams once they're in rotations and once you're playing out of advantage. I think McCain's going to be a very nice off-ball contributor for a team. He's not going to be a super high usage on-ball player, but I think with his overall skill set, he's going to be able to take advantage of certain opportunities when he does have the ball in his hands. It's more than just a shooter for me. I think McCain, defensively, he's a competitor as well. Obviously, he's gained a lot of notoriety for his TikToks as well. I think McCain is just a very sound and solid NBA draft prospect, someone who I like a lot. I have him at 12 right now. Could maybe finagle him up a little bit by the end of the cycle, but I feel really good about having him in this spot. A lot of my mock drafts, he's been a lock in the lottery. I think he will be a lottery pick on draft night just with his shooting and ancillary skills, as well as an off-ball and on-ball playmaker a little bit. So for me, I think McCain is going to be a very good pickup for a team. He's going to positively contribute to the spacing on the floor while still being a really, really good shooter when it's in his hands. Number 11, I have Matas Buzelis from the G League Ignite program. This is one of the big shockers of the video here, I'm sure, for most people. Coming into this year, I had Matas Buzelis as my tentative number 1 pick. I thought that there was a real chance this year for G League Ignite that he could have exploded, really came on and burst onto the scene of an open draft class and cemented himself as the number 1 guy. Quite frankly, that did not happen. He sustained some injuries early in the process. I think it did hamper and affect his overall season. He did not shoot the ball very well from 3. And that, of course, does play a big factor into my overall evaluation of him here At Sunrise Christian, he wasn't the most reliable three-point shooter. Now, he had stretches of time where he did shoot the ball well, and he got to the rim extremely well at Sunrise Christian as well back in high school. I've been watching Matas Buzelis for about 4 or 5 years. I'm a big believer in his. I do think he's a talented forward who's going to be able to give a team real positional flexibility on a defensive side of the floor, whether you want him to guard 4s, do you want him to guard 3s, even in some situations you might put him on 2s. I could see him guarding like a Bogdan Bogdanovic for certain nights as well in the league, that kind of shooting guard. I think Buzelis has a lot of the things you're looking for from a height, wingspan, length, overall skill set, field component. He can play make as a forward. You can have him handle the ball a bit, bring it up in transition, go coast to coast with it. He operates off the baseline very well. I think those are a lot of the positives. So you might be saying, well, what are your real concerns other than just the three-point shooting? First of all, the three-point shooting is one of the big concerns because, again, if you're a forward, how much floor spacing can you provide around a center and realistically a pick and roll construct where the team is not playing solely through Matas Buzelis, so whoever has the ball needs to have some real spacing, and you need the defense to respect Buzelis' jump shot, which that's a question right now. My other big question is when he does catch the basketball, does he have the reliable burst to get to the rim consistently? And that's not a knock on him. He was playing through injuries this past year, so that's just a big question I still have. Right now, with my film that I have on him from G League Ignite, he struggled to get all the way to the rim and became a little reliant on that turnaround jump shot, that turnaround 15-foot fadeaway, which is not a bad shot, but it shouldn't be your number one shot. You know, we're past the time of Dirk Nowitzki being able to win a championship that way. With the way that math and analytics have affected the game, teams are constantly hunting the smartest shots on the floor, and Matas Buzelis shooting 15-foot jumpers, fadeaways from the baseline just does not check into that. So even though that's a good part of his game, I do like his touch, I like his finesse finishing, I like his ability to turn around and shoot over smaller defenders. That can't be his number one go-to move. So for me, I still think that if he's in better shape, if he's healthy, maybe he can just flat out get to the rim consistently. It's just a big question I have on him right now. Again, this is not a final ranking. It's very possible Buzelis ends up in my top 6 or 7. So I have him at 11 right now. This is tentatively where he's going to be ranked for me. This was surprising for me as I was kind of finalizing this. I thought I was going to, just with my overall thought process this draft cycle, I just felt like I was going to have him in the top 6 or 7. The more I sat down and really ironed things out before this video over the last couple of months, the more I settled on Buzelis outside of the top 10. Again, there's room for that to change, but right now he sits at 11 on my board. At number 10, this is maybe one of the biggest surprises of the entire video. I have Ajay Mitchell from UC Santa Barbara. I know a lot of other people in the draft community currently have him slated as a second-round pick. I think that's crazy. From just an overall effectiveness standpoint, an overall efficiency standpoint, how he plays, the way he plays, his size, skill set profile, he should be a top 15 pick in this year's draft. Just flat out should be. He reminds me a ton of Jalen Brunson, and I know all draft cycle long, everyone's going to compare Mark Sears to Jalen Brunson. I'm telling you, Ajay Mitchell has more Jalen Brunson in him than Mark Sears does. Not only is he left-handed, he plays off of 2 feet extremely well. He's got really great feel as a playmaker, and he shot almost 40% from 3 this past year and flirted with a 50-40-90 season for UC Santa Barbara. I think that Ajay Mitchell is really, really criminally underrated. He'll be 22 years old on draft night. His birthday is one day before the night of the draft. He will be freshly 22 years old. I think he's NBA ready to contribute on day 1 of his career, and I think he has starting point guard written all over him, very similar to how Jalen Brunson did coming out of Villanova. Now, if you are looking for concerns about Ajay Mitchell, his shooting success is not career long. In fact, his sophomore season at UC Santa Barbara, he did not shoot the ball very well, but this year he shot it lights out. So on higher volume, by the way. So I do believe in his overall jump shot. When I watch him play, I like the mechanics of his jump shot. He gets reliable backspin on it. I do believe he will be a good shooter. His free throw percentage indicates that as well. I'm not the biggest believer in free throw percentage being a true indicator of shooting success at the NBA level, but I do think there is a little bit of truth to that. I do think that's worth monitoring as well for Ajay Mitchell. And then from a playmaking standpoint, you might say, okay, you talked about the scoring. He gets to 2 feet. He finishes around the rim very well, by the way. Over 50% of his shots came at the rim, and he shot over 60% from the field at the rim as a guard, which is very impressive. But then outside of that, as a playmaker, he is an adept pick and roll ball handler, day one of his career, you put him in a pick and roll, he's going to make the right play. I think he can fit around other stars because of that, because when he has the ball in his hands, he's very level-headed, surefire, quality decision maker. He ranked in the 97th percentile from a volume perspective on pick and roll opportunities in college basketball this past year, and he ranked in the 91st percentile from an efficiency standpoint. So not only did he run a ton of pick and rolls, he has a ton of experience coming into the NBA. He was extremely great at it. Oh, and by the way, he ranked in the 80th plus percentile as a spot-up threat. So just like how we talked about with Tyler Kolek having some off-ball capabilities, AJ Mitchell shares those off-ball capabilities as a spot-up shooter, someone who can play off of the catch, get downhill as a finisher, and as a shooter. I think you have to respect him on the three-point line. And then when it comes to his ability as a scorer himself on the basketball, he's a lot more dangerous than Tyler Kolek was, who we highlighted at 23. I think AJ Mitchell is a very, very good player. I think a starting level point guard in the NBA. I'm not saying he's going to be a superstar. I'm not saying he's going to be a Hall of Famer like Jalen Brunson. I'm saying he's going to be a very, 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 very good basketball player, someone who I trust putting the ball in the hands of late in games. I think AJ Mitchell, extremely underrated this draft process. I have him top 10 on my board right now, and I'm a big believer in what he's going to be at the next level. So when AJ Mitchell ends up being an awesome NBA player, just remember who told you before everyone else. I know some people like AJ Mitchell too, so I'm not saying I'm the one who discovered him or anything, but I've been high on the AJ Mitchell train for a very long time. If you go to my Twitter, links in the description by the way, you'll see that I've been tweeting about AJ Mitchell for a very long time. So I'm a big believer in his game. I think there's a lot of talent to work with, and I think he's going to become an NBA starting point guard at some point in the future. Number 9, I have Nikola Topic from Red Star. And this might be another surprise one for you. In a lot of my mock drafts, he's been a top 4 or 5 pick. I have him at number 9 right now because I do have some questions about his on-ball burst, his ability to get to the rim, and how reliant he's going to be on screens at the next level, at the NBA level, against some of the best athletes in the world and some of the best point of attack defenders in the world. Will Topic be able to consistently beat his guy off the dribble? And will he have enough scoring gravity to make teams respect him when it comes to help side defense? And our team's going to have to rotate a ton because of him. That's some of the big questions. But for me, I still do love his positional size. When it comes to playmaking feel in this year's draft, he's probably at the top of the list. He has some of the best passing vision in this year's draft, if not the best. He's also got, again, that size, that positional size to be able to make passes over the top of the defense. He's going to be able to occupy weak side corner defenders with his eyes. He can manipulate defenses with his passing vision. He can look defenders off. He's got creativity from passing angles. He's an extremely good passer, and I think he's going to be an extremely good pick and roll player. He shot over 60% on twos in his time with in Mega Basket this past year. Now his efficiency and his success playing for Red Star in the EuroLeague has diminished a little bit. Obviously, there's been some injury concerns as well with Topic, but those don't really affect me here in my evaluation on him. I'm not really factoring in injury concerns right now. I'm just flat out looking at the talent. I think Topic, again, there's a lot of interchangeability here. So Topic being at 9 doesn't mean, first of all, I'm married to that. I could see him as a top 5 prospect when it's all said and done. But with where I'm currently at with him, I have questions about his three-point shot. I have questions about his overall scoring gravity and his burst to get downhill one-on-one. But when it comes to pick and roll play, passing capability, and the ability to read the floor, he's probably right at the top of this year's class in all of those components as well. Number 8, I have Ron Holland from the G League Ignite. Measured in really well, 6'6.5", so you're looking at a real near 6'8" wing with an impressive wingspan at nearly 6'11". I honestly thought he was going to measure in a little bit smaller than that, but it does make some sense with his play style, and honestly I think breeds more life into his play style as well. As a downhill finisher, a downhill rim attacker, he's going to shoot a ton of free throws, and if there's a guy right now that you told me way outperforms where I have him ranked, I would bet that that's Ron Holland, because I have my reservations. His playmaking feels not there. His three-point shot really isn't. He struggled as a shooter for the G League Ignite program, which isn't a surprise. He's going from high school basketball to professional basketball for the same reasons I talked about Matas Buzelis, where you maybe don't want to just completely bet against that three-point shot. I'm not saying Ron Holland's doomed as a three-point shooter. Those are some of the concerns, though, coming into his NBA career. I do think, though, that if you told me that there's one guy on this list that just way outperforms where you have him ranked, I would bet it's Ron Holland, because he has a lot of superstar qualities to him. He gets to the rim. He is explosive off of the live dribble. He plays into contact. He initiates contact. He gets to the free throw line a ton, and he makes plays on the defensive end of the floor, which to me, when someone has a pretty good steal rate, when they're able to kind of be a play ahead, first of all, that tells me that they have very good basketball instincts, but also tells me that athletically they're way more gifted than some of the players they're facing. And for Ron Holland, it popped on his tape at times that he was way more athletic than other G League caliber players. I think there's a lot of traits about Ron Holland that scream star. It's just not all there. His playmaking definitely isn't. He had a negative assist to turnover ratio this past year. The three-point shot's not there. The pull-up jump shot's not there quite yet. But I do think there's a lot to love with Ron Holland's game. I have him as a top 10 prospect. I do not see that changing in this year's draft. He's going to be a good player. It just really comes down to, is he a Benedict Mathurin, which is kind of the comp I'm landing on a lot right now with him, or does he turn into something more than that as a really elite downhill finisher, someone who's going to shoot 8 to 10 free throws a game? That's one of the big questions, but I think Ron Holland right now, kind of in that little bit of questionability area right now, where is he Ben Mathurin or is he better than that? For me right now, I'm trending a little bit more toward that Benedict Mathurin comparison, which I don't think is a bad thing. Moving on to pick number 7, I have Stephon Castle. I keep saying pick. Can you tell I've been recording mock drafts? My 7th ranked player in the draft right now is Stephon Castle, who measured in as a ginormous guard, 6'5.5" without shoes on, so he's standing nearly 6'7" with shoes. He's got a giant wingspan at 6'9". He's got an NBA ready frame, 210 pounds, and the tape just really stands out to me as a defensive monster. Someone who could be an elite point of attack, hound dog, sit down on your right hand, force you to go left, get through every screen, just make your life a living hell. And I think Stephon Castle, if you're looking at him, and why would you draft this guy in the top 10? It's to be a lockdown point of attack defender who does a lot of other things very, very well. He was utilized as a high-low man for UConn on both ends of things, sometimes playing at the free throw line and feeding Donovan Clingan on lobs, sometimes playing as the low man himself and cleaning up the offensive glass, or sitting in the dunker spot, catching a little bounce pass and going up with it and finishing strong through traffic. He does a lot of those little things well that when you're watching a prospect, they don't stand out as highlights. They don't stand out as, wow, look at this kid, he's got superstar written all over him, but they're a bunch of winning plays. And that's exactly what Stephon Castle is going to make a ton of money doing, is making winning plays. Now, one of the big concerns for him is obviously the jump shot. How reliable will his three-point shot be? To be honest with you, I like the mechanics. Now, one thing that always happens, some prospect in this year's draft is going to get drafted to a team that tries to alter his jump shot, and all of a sudden it goes from looking pretty good and not making a ton of them to looking terrible and missing a lot of them. And that is Johnny Davis, for example. Like, Stephon Castle, for me, I'm scared that some team's going to ruin his jump shot completely trying to fix it. But I like his mechanics. I do think that he just needs way more reps. I think the more he shoots, if they can speed up his release a little bit, just tell him, hey, you got to shoot it a little bit quicker, he becomes a really, really dynamic player who honestly has a lot of star qualities to him from a physical size, weight standpoint. The way he moves, he looks like a star. He's extremely mobile, has very good hip fluidity, a ton of functional athleticism, a good 2-foot jumper, a good 1-foot jumper. The screen navigation defensively is there. And he's got that winning mentality, that winning attitude to him. It just really comes down to how dangerous does that three-point shot become. And I think one thing that's been very underrated in Castle's development as a draft prospect is his handle. I think, he said it during the week of the Combine, saying that he views himself as a point guard, and that's something he didn't really get to do next to Tristan Newton at UConn. I think Castle has a lot of traits and a lot of qualities that he is still exploring, showing us as a prospect, and it goes back to watching him through high school. I've been watching players like Stephon Castle for 3-4 years, so I have a good overall idea of what these players are capable of, and I do think there's a lot more than Castle showed us at UConn that he is capable of doing at the NBA level. For me, if I had to give a comp for him, he's a little bit like Derek White, which I know that's kind of become the common comp for guys who are multi-positional defensive type of prospects as a guard. I just like Castle's game. I think he's going to be a good NBA player, and I think he's going to be a big-time contributor to winning at the next level. Number 6, I have Cody Williams, and this one is another one where some people are probably going to disagree with me. Again, that's completely okay, perfectly healthy. I think Cody Williams has a lot of traits that are going to translate very, very well to the NBA game, where there's a little bit more pacing, a little bit more spacing on the floor. I think his skill set is going to thrive in that setting. At 6'6.5", he's a true 6'8" wing with shoes on. He's got a massive wingspan at 7'1". And the one thing that really impresses me about his game, while still being very slight, he was a really dynamic driver of the basketball. Kind of the opposite situation of Ron Holland, who's coming in with a big, strong physical frame, who you're going to bet on as a rim finisher, contact drawer early. Cody Williams right now, his frame is not built to withstand contact. And yet he was still a very, very good slasher of the basketball because of his touch and finesse. He finds little angles, creates room to finish at the rim with his elongated reach. I think as Cody Williams develops and matures as a pro, he's going to put on weight, he's going to get closer to that 200-pound mark, and once he does, he has a real pathway to becoming a true offensive weapon with the ability to drive the basketball, play through contact if he ever adds that into his game, while still having the finesse touch to score over and around contact. I think that's one of the most impressive things about his game to me, is how high of a volume driver he was, and then his ability to make plays as a wing off of a live dribble, both as a facilitator, a creator of offense in the half court, and in transition. Cody Williams stands out to me as a guy who has a very, very, very high ceiling in this draft class. With his overall size length component, the physicals just really suggest he's going to turn into a good player, especially as he puts on a little bit more muscle, bulks up a bit in an NBA weight program. And then, people are going to point to the shooting questions. He shot the ball really well. He ranked in the 90th plus percentile as a catch and shoot shooter this past year. Now, it was on very low volume. He only shot 41 threes this past season for the Buffaloes. So I understand people's skepticism there, because if he missed 3 or 4 more shots, all of a sudden his numbers look way different. But the reality is, when he shot the ball, especially open, he made a very, very good amount of them. So you have to take what we've seen from Cody Williams. He was a very high recruit coming out of high school. I liked his talent coming in out of high school. I projected him as a top 10 pick in my way too early mock at the beginning of this cycle. And at this point in time, I think that everything he showed us in his one injury-riddled season at Colorado still suggests that he could be worth a top 10 pick. And right now I have him 6th overall in this class. Number 5, I have Donovan Clingan, so another UConn Husky here, and a 2-time national champion. And I think he was one of the most important pieces of that championship run, not only as a freshman, but definitely as a sophomore. And honestly, I think if there's a huge winner from the Combine, I do think Donovan Clingan stands out to me. I don't know if people were expecting him to fully measure in at 7'2" without shoes on. Everyone knew he's kind of a huge human being, maybe 7'1" without shoes, maybe a little bit less than that, but a true 7-footer. No, he measured in ginormous at 7'1" and 3/4. He's got great mobility, great feel for the game defensively. He's going to be a true defensive anchor. He's going to play predominantly in drop coverage, like we talked about with Zach Edey. So you might be saying, well, what's the difference between Donovan Clingan and Zach Edey then? And why do you have Clingan as your 5th best prospect and Edey as your 20th best prospect? And I think that's a great question, because there's a lot of nuance in this as to why I'm such a big believer in Clingan, and a little bit less so in Edey, but still a believer in Edey's game as well, translating to the NBA in a certain setting. I think Clingan, there's a lot more you can do with him offensively outside of just scoring the basketball. In fact, he's not going to score the ball as well as Zach Edey. That's, I think, a given. But I think he's a much better screen setter than Zach Edey, both on and off the basketball. If you go back to 2 years ago, Donovan Clingan's primary role, playing next to Jordan Hawkins, who continues to just get brought up in this video, I was not planning on that. Donovan Clingan sets a ton of off-ball screens 2 years ago. This year, kind of transitioned to being more of an on-ball screen setter, and also worked a ton as a top-of-the-key delayed 5-man who, for those of you who do not know, delay is your NBA 5-out offense, where the big man stands at the top of the key, facilitates ball reversals, runs into dribble handoffs. Donovan Clingan did a bunch of that. And one thing about Hurley's offense there at UConn, it was a very pro-styled modern offense. And that's why in the national championship game, UConn ran away with it against Purdue. Purdue is playing an outdated college basketball style system, and the UConn Huskies are playing NBA-style basketball with NBA-style talent. And as a result, UConn was way better than everybody this year. And Donovan Clingan was at the heart and center of it all on both ends of the floor as a high usage playmaker, facilitator, screener, and a play finisher, while also being utilized defensively as your anchor, rim protector, rim deterrent, everything you could imagine and more. Donovan Clingan, for me, the 5th best prospect in this year's class right now. Could see him sliding down a couple of spots. Not sure how high he's really going to slide for me up in this year's draft, but I do like him a lot, and I do believe he's worth a top 10 pick, no doubt about it, in this year's draft. Number 4, I have Zachary Rissachet from France. And these measurements right now, since he was not at the NBA Draft Combine, again, are speculative. These are some of the reported numbers we have on him, but not actually guaranteed. So he stands around 6'9" with about a 6'11" wingspan, 210 pounds, and a 19.2-year-old draft age. We do know his draft age for sure. The others are speculative. When it comes to his overall skill, though, I think in most of my videos I have really harped and focused on his three-point shooting, which is at the heart of his game and at the heart of his offensive role at the NBA level, is going to be able to knock down open shots playing off the catch. But I have underrated his ability to attack closeouts and make plays off of a live dribble. Now, he's not going to be DeMar DeRozan. He's not going to be a high-usage shot-creating type of player, but if you close out on him aggressively, he has a very good rip-through. He can beat you off of a dribble. He can get to spots on the floor where he's a very capable pull-up shooter, and he can get all the way to the rim with his length. He's, again, very big, long, lengthy, athletic prospect who moves extremely well and then defensively utilizes that athleticism to his advantage. Now, I heard a comp for him from a very well-known analyst. I'm not going to say who, but comparing him to Jaden McDaniels. I'm not sure about that. I think Jaden McDaniels is a pretty special defensive athlete. I think Zachary Rissachet is not quite that level of defender, but I do think his offensive game is going to be a little bit more reliable than Jaden McDaniels. So overall, he could be a very, very good prospect and overall a very good player who impacts winning, whether that's as a small forward or a power forward. I think you're getting some real positional flexibility. We saw the Timberwolves mostly use Jaden McDaniels as a 3 this past year, where you're then very long, athletic, and you have a lot of rebounding, length, and size around him. Or you could use him as a 4, stretch teams out, play a little bit quicker. I think you have a lot of flexibility there with however you want to build your team, which is one of the beautiful things about drafting Rissachet in the top 3 or 4 this year. You're going to get a player who fits into multiple different schemes. You can put different kinds of players around him because he's got a pretty cut and dry fitting skill set to fit around other talent and other players, and that's why Rissachet could be a really dynamic pickup for a team going forward. Number 3, I have Rob Dillingham from Kentucky. And this is where, some people are going to have some real pushback on my top 3, especially numbers 3 and 2. I have Dillingham in the top 3 for a few different reasons. Now, he's very light. He's very small. He measured in not very well at the combine. I'm not really surprised by it. I don't know who is because he looks small. All of his film, he looks tiny. But one thing I do know about his film, and this comes back to what I emphasized in the open, I value good basketball players. And Rob Dillingham is a very good basketball player. The question is, can he dribble, can he pass, and can he shoot? The resounding answer to all of those is yes, and he's very good at all of them. He has an electric live handle. He can create separation in the drop of a hat. He's somebody who, even when you feel like you're in front of him, you might not be because he's setting you up the whole way. And that's one of the things about him using screens. I think he sets up screens extremely well. You go back to even his time playing for the Cold Hearts in the Overtime Elite program, he's always been a very adept pick and roll ball handler, someone who can create space, create separation with a live handle. For me, that's really at the heart of offense creation. If you're going to draft a point guard, if you're going to draft someone to run your offense, they need to be able to score and create gravity and create open opportunities for themselves. And that's one of the reasons why Nikola was down at number 9. I'm a little bit more skeptical on his ability to win one-on-one at the NBA level, whereas Dillingham, I feel like, is going to be a walking advantage creator, whether that's downhill or step back off of a hesitation, off of a crossover. He's just got a very dynamic handle where with his shooting, he's going to be a threat. He shot over 44% from 3 this past year for the Wildcats, and a lot of those came on extremely difficult volume, whether it's very deep range or with a hand in his face, coming off of a pick and roll where he's pulling up into three-pointers, pulling up in transition. But he also is very good just playing off the catch as a spot-up threat. He showcased the ability to exist off the basketball, kind of like what we saw from Tyrese Maxey playing next to James Harden for a couple of years in Philadelphia. Now, I'm not saying Dillingham is the next Tyrese Maxey, but we know the value it is to have a player who is capable playing off and on the basketball. And I think Dillingham, his shooting skill set and his ability to attack in short areas will make him a very good off-ball player, while the handle and the passing capabilities make him a great on-ball player as well. And that's where his pick-and-roll nuance, the ability to not only set up screens, but then also to attack off of him, really utilize his scoring gravity to create options for especially the pick-and-roll roll man. I think he's going to get a ton of assists in his career to rollers. And it's not about what Anthony Edwards, for example, when you watch the Timberwolves, he uses the roller to read the opposite side of the floor. The low man comes into tag, and all of a sudden he's trying to skip past it to the opposite side corner. Well, guess what? Rob Dillingham is going to do the opposite. He's going to get to a spot where he looks off to the opposite corner. All of a sudden he looks like he's going to maybe take a pull-up jump shot. He gets the big man to step to him, and all of a sudden it's a lob dunk for his rolling big man. First of all, bigs are going to love playing with him because he's going to reward them on rolls and working hard and getting all the way to the rim. But then also having a good screener next to him is just going to create pretty easy offense because of his ability to make shots off of a live dribble, make shots off balance, create opportunities to score. And with his scoring gravity, that's where the rest of his playmaking is really opened up. Number 2, I have Reed Sheppard from Kentucky. And I can read the comments now. I can hear them in my head saying, "Oh my gosh, you have Reed Sheppard." Listen, the 3 words: dribble, pass, shoot. This kid's elite at all of them. He can dribble. Now, he's not like Rob Dillingham, where Dillingham, I really love Dillingham because of his elite electric handle. Reed doesn't have that electric handle, but what he does have is a very functional handle. He uses his dribble to get to spots on the floor to make reads. It's not about getting somewhere and having a highlight reel type of play for Reed Sheppard. It's about getting into a pick and roll quickly, concisely, getting to a spot on the floor where the defense has to move, rotate, shift, and all of a sudden Sheppard's got the nuance in his passing game and his scoring to find that gap, attack it, and maximize it, either as a facilitator or a scorer. He averaged over 4 assists per game this past year for Kentucky, over a 2-to-1 assist to turnover ratio as well for the Wildcats. He was extremely productive as a facilitator. If you had to ask me how to kind of rate Reed Sheppard or kind of give a comparison, I would say he is like Austin Reeves with Malik Beasley's jump shot. And that is an awesome player. Austin Reeves, super competitive when it was his time at Oklahoma as a draft prospect. He was a super high usage, high volume pick and roll ball handler. We've obviously seen that translate very well to playing in the NBA for the Los Angeles Lakers. Reed Sheppard, I think, has a lot of those characteristics as someone who can facilitate an offense, get on the basketball a decent amount, make plays. I'm not saying he's going to be a super high volume number 1 pick and roll ball handler, anything like that. I think that's more Dillingham's game. I think Sheppard has the ability to do that, though. Just like we've seen Reed Sheppard coexist off of LeBron, I think Reed Sheppard has that coexist ability next to other superstars while also having the capability to run an offense. And with that shooting touch, he shot over 50% from 3. His spot-up numbers were ridiculous. He ranked in the 100th percentile among all prospects as a spot-up threat. So you're literally looking at the best shooter in this year's draft in Reed Sheppard. His volume, his efficiency is off the charts. He is somebody who, when it comes from a dribble pass shoot perspective, is just flat out very, very good. And I'm at the point in time, everyone's going to bet on the upside picks. They're all going to say, well, if Nikola Topic, listen to me. What happened to Russell Westbrook in Los Angeles? Why did it not work with LeBron James? It's because they were both on-ball creators, on-ball initiators, and they didn't fit together. What happened to DeJounte Murray in Atlanta? Why have him and Trae Young not worked together? The fit is the most important part. And if you're telling me there's a player in this draft who fits perfectly next to any superstar in the league, the answer is clearly Reed Sheppard. He fits next to everybody because off the ball, he has a role. On the ball, he has a role. He can do multiple things. And by the way, he has one of the best steal rates in the entire class. Averaged over 2 steals per game. He is incredibly smart and defensively knows how to position himself to make up for some of his height deficiencies. You know, people are going to be freaking out about him being less than 6'2" tall without shoes on. He's been this small his whole life. He has been playing against much bigger athletes, much better athletes for a long stretch of his career. He's really, really good at basketball, and that is at the heart of my evaluation. Is this player really good at basketball? Yes or no? Reed Sheppard is awesome at basketball. He can fit on or off the basketball. He is a really, really sound player, someone who in a class where there's a lot of questions, he is a no-brainer. He is super safe, super smart, super reliable. I think he's going to be an awesome NBA player. He's going to have a 15 to 20 year career. It's going to be tremendous watching him grow and develop both on and off the basketball, where he's already good at both things at a very respectable level. Then my number one prospect in this year's class, Alex Sarr from Perth. Measured in extremely well at the combine, nearly 7 feet tall without shoes. He'll stand at about 7'1" with shoes on. An impressive wingspan, impressive weight for him. I think it's important that he's north of 220 pounds. I think the hope for him is if you're drafting him first overall, which is what I expect the Atlanta Hawks to do on draft night, you hope that he can become your long-term center and be an anchor to a defense. Now, there are questions about, is he going to have that tweenerism to him like Jaren Jackson Jr. or maybe Evan Mobley? Perhaps he does have a little bit of that to him, but offensively, he's got the skill set that I think can fit into playing next to another big man if you really need him to, and maybe you could have this dynamic shot blocking front court rim protection duo that we've seen have success in the regular season, especially for teams like the Minnesota Timberwolves, teams like the Cleveland Cavaliers. Having size does not hurt, especially if it's skilled size. So Alex Sarr, someone who I think is an underrated playmaker, showed a lot of things off the dribble playing in the NBL that I don't think has gotten enough respect or credit in the draft cycle. I think he's a really good prospect. You know, everyone continues to say this draft class is not very good. He has a lot of the same characteristics to a Chet Holmgren, to a Victor Wembanyama, to a Evan Mobley. Some of the most recent top 4 or 5 picks in drafts, he shares a lot of those same qualities. Now, you might say he might be the worst version of all of them. That's okay, because you're still looking at a potential all-star caliber player, someone who, yes, he's not a no-brainer, obvious number one selection. He's not the golden prize at the end of the tunnel most teams want or wait for, but I still think he's really darn good. He can shoot the basketball. He has a lot of shot-making touch. He shot a ton of dribble pull-ups in the NBL, which is very unique for a 7-footer to be playing with a live handle, creating opportunities for himself off the bounce. I do think there's a ton of potential for him to work on and grow into. He already referenced as well during the combine this week that the number one thing he's been working on since the end of the NBL season was his reliability as an NBA three-point shooter. So he's been getting up a ton of reps, working behind the NBA three-point line. For me, I think I'm pretty much locked in with him being the number one player in the class here. I really trust that he's going to be a defensive chess piece, someone you can run a bunch of different pick and roll defensive coverages with. I think you can at times switch with him. I think you can afford to let him live out in space occasionally. I think you can play him in drop. I think you can play him as a hedger. I think you can form a high wall with him. I think there's just a lot of things. You can blitz with him. You can do a number of different things with Sarr. And then he's also going to be a very good weak side rim protector, shot blocker, rim deterrent. I think defensively he's going to be very, very, very good. And then offensively, I think he's going to have a pathway to growing into a very good short roller as a playmaker, a good long roller with his overall length and athleticism. And then obviously if the shot really comes around, that's when you're looking at a dynamic offensive player who can shoot the basketball or make plays off of a live dribble as both a play finisher and a play creator for others. Sarr's got a lot of upside. I think he's going to be a tremendous player in the NBA. Whether he's an all-star or not, that's yet to be seen. But I think there's a ton of potential, and I think a fitting number one overall pick in this year's draft. And I think the Hawks got very lucky moving up with that 3% chance and getting a player who's going to be a really key piece for them for the next 7 to 10 years. Thank you all so much for watching. I really hope you did enjoy today's video. It took me a long time to put this together, both from an actual graphic creation standpoint to just building my big board. Remember, this is version 1.0. Let me know your thoughts down in the comment section below. I had a great time recording this, guys. I hope you enjoyed it as well. Leave a like and subscribe if you did, and we'll catch you in the very next Utility Sports video.